Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen Consort of France and England. In the Middle Ages, Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the most important and powerful people. She became the most sought-after bride of her time after inheriting a sizable estate at the age of 15. She would eventually ascend to the throne as Queen of France, England, and the Holy Land. She is also credited with founding and maintaining many of the chivalric courtly customs. Early life. Eleanor was presumably born in 1122 in what is now southern France. When she became her father's presumed heir at age 5, she had had a good education from her sophisticated father, William X, Duke of Aquitaine. She was well versed in literature, philosophy, and languages and had been prepared for the rigors of court life. She loved horses and lived an active life until she inherited her father's title and vast estates at the age of 15 and instantly became Duchess of Aquitaine, making her by far the most desirable unmarried young woman in all of Europe. Within hours of being under the king's protection, she was engaged to his son and heir, Louis. Eleanor was informed of the news and taken to her new residence by a 500-man escort that the king dispatched. Eleanor of Aquitaine becomes Queen of France. Despite getting married in July 1137, Louis and Eleanor had little opportunity to get to know one another before Louis' father, the king, became ill and passed away. A few weeks after getting married, Eleanor found herself moving into her new apartment in Paris' drafty and unwelcoming sight palace. Louis and Eleanor were made King and Queen of France on Christmas Day of the same year. In their early years as monarchs, Louis and Eleanor encountered numerous power confrontations with their own vassals, including the formidable Count Theobald of Champagne and the Pope in Rome. Louis, who was still quite young and impetuous, made a number of diplomatic and military errors that caused him to fall out with the Pope and several of his more able peers. The war that followed culminated in the death of hundreds of innocent people in Vitry. During the siege of the town, a large portion of the populace sought sanctuary in a church, which Louis's forces set on fire. Louis warmly embraced the Pope's call for a crusade in 1145 despite having been plagued by remorse about his part in the tragedy for years. He took Eleanor with him on the perilous and tragic trek to the west. Eleanor and Louis distanced themselves more and more as the crusade did not go well. Eleanor and Louis were eventually given an annulment in 1152 on the basis of consanguinity. After several tumultuous years during which Eleanor sought an annulment and Louis faced growing public condemnation, their two daughters were left in the care of the monarch. Eleanor becomes Queen of England. After fending off attempts to wed her off to many other prominent French noblemen within 2 months of her annulment, Eleanor wed Henry, Count of Anjou and Duke of Normandy. She was more closely related to her new husband than she was to Louis, and there were rumors that she had an affair with his father. Nevertheless, the couple married, and 2 years later, Henry and Eleanor were crowned King and Queen of England following Henry's ascension to the throne following the death of King Stephen. Eleanor and Henry had a happier marriage than she had with her first husband, albeit there was still turmoil and disagreement. Despite their frequent disagreements, Henry and Eleanor had 8 children between 1152 and 1166. Although it seems improbable that a woman of Eleanor's reported vigor and knowledge would have been totally without influence, the extent of Eleanor's role in Henry's rule is largely unclear. However, she doesn't reappear in a publicly visible capacity until she splits from Henry in 1167 and relocates her family to her own domains in Poitiers. Although the grounds for the dissolution of her marriage to Henry are still unknown, they were probably caused by his increasingly obvious affairs. Eleanor of Aquitaine and the Court of Love. The mythology of the Court of Love was created during Eleanor's reign as mistress of her own domains in Poitiers, when she is said to have fostered a culture of chivalry among her courtiers that had a significant impact on literature, poetry, music, and folklore. It appears that Eleanor, possibly assisted by her daughter Marie, established a court that was primarily focused on courtly love and symbolic ritual, which was eagerly adopted by the troubadours and writers of the day, and propagated through poetry and song. However, some facts about the court remain in dispute amid centuries of accumulated legend and myth. According to reports, this court drew poets and painters and helped the arts and culture flourish. Although Eleanor was later captured and imprisoned, thereby removing her from any position of authority or influence for the following 16 years, it doesn't seem that such a court lasted. Imprisonment. Young Henry, Eleanor's son, reportedly plotting to overthrow his father and take the English crown, fled to France in 1173. Eleanor was detained and put in prison for treason since it was rumored that she was actively assisting her son's plots against her estranged husband. After being captured, she spent the following 16 years moving between different castles and strongholds in England while being suspected of stirring up trouble for her husband's interests, and being blamed by some for the passing of his favorite mistress, Rosamond. After years of rebellion and death, young Henry begged on his deathbed for his mother's release before finally succumbing to illness in 1183. When she returned to England in 1184, Henry freed her under guard, allowing her to rejoin his household for at least a portion of each year. She then resumed some of her ceremonial duties as queen and joined him on solemn occasions. Regency and death. After his father Henry II passed away in July 1189, Richard took over as king. One of Richard's first acts was to set his mother free and grant her full independence. Richard assumed command of the Third Crusade, which had just begun when Henry II passed away, while Eleanor served as his regent. Richard, often known as Richard the Lionheart, returned to England when the crusade was over and ruled there until his death in 1199. Eleanor was John's envoy to France and lived to see her youngest son, John, become king after Richard's passing. She later retired as a nun to the convent in Fontevraud, where she was buried after passing away in 1204 and continued to support John's rule against her grandson Arthur's uprising.